There is a moment most cooks know well. You are standing in your own kitchen, dinner already late, and you cannot find the vegetable peeler. You check the drawer by the stove. You check the drawer by the sink. You moved a stack of mail off the counter, looked under a dish towel someone left bunched up next to the toaster, and still nothing. The peeler turns up eventually, behind a cutting board that does not have a real home, next to a spatula that belongs somewhere else. By the time you start cooking, you are already tired. That feeling has a name, even if nobody calls it by one. It is the feeling of a kitchen that does not have a system. And the strange thing is that it is not caused by dirt. The dishes might be clean, the floor might be swept, the counters wiped down. The kitchen looks fine, but it does not run. Every meal starts with a small search. Every attempt to cook involves moving something out of the way first. The room is technically clean and functionally chaotic at the same time. 70 years ago, that specific kind of chaos was far less common. Not because kitchens were bigger, most of them were smaller. Not because women had more time, most of them had less. The difference was something simpler and harder to see from the outside. The 1950s kitchen was built around a system. Every item had a designated place, and that place was chosen deliberately. Nothing was stored randomly. Nothing lived on the counter unless it was used every single day. The pantry was organized by logic, not by whatever fit. The cleaning supplies had their own corner, and they stayed in it. And at the end of every single use, not every day, not once a week, but every single use, the kitchen was reset back to that order before anyone walked away from it. The result was a kitchen that almost ran itself. Not because it was magic, and not because the women who kept it were extraordinary. It ran because the system underneath it was sound. When everything has one home, and everyone in the house knows where that home is, the kitchen does not slowly drift into disorder. It holds its shape. You open a drawer and find what you reached for. You start cooking without moving anything out of the way first. The room feels calm before the meal begins, not after the mess is already made. If you have never experienced a kitchen like that, it can sound too simple to be real. But this video is going to walk through exactly how it worked. The zones, the storage logic, the pantry rules, the countertop discipline, and the one daily habit that kept the whole system alive. These were not complicated methods. They were quiet decisions made consistently. And the women who used them passed them down, not through books, but through watching and doing. If that is the kind of kitchen you have been wanting, one that feels settled, one where nothing is ever lost, then you are in the right place. If this channel is new to you, consider subscribing. Every video here looks at the practical systems that older generations built into their daily lives. The kind of knowledge that was never written down in a manual because it was just understood. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Whether you are in a small apartment in the city or a farmhouse kitchen somewhere with more counter space than you know what to do with, this system works regardless of square footage. Now, the first thing to understand about the 1950s kitchen is that its tidiness was not a personality trait. It was not the result of one woman being naturally organized while her neighbor lived in clutter. It was a designed environment. The kitchen was laid out with intention, and the intention behind it was straightforward. The room should support the work, not fight against it. That idea sounds obvious, but walk through the average modern kitchen and count how many things are stored based on convenience in the moment versus actual use. The heavy stand mixer sits on the counter because it is too heavy to lift down from a shelf, even though it is used twice a month. The spice rack is next to the refrigerator because that is where there was wall space, even though the stove is on the opposite side of the room. The junk drawer exists not because anyone planned it, but because there was a drawer with no assignment. And things kept landing in it. The kitchen was not designed, it accumulated. The 1950s kitchen was not accumulated, it was arranged. And the arrangement started with one foundational rule that shaped everything else. The counter was not storage. The counter was a work surface. Nothing lived on it permanently. The toaster might sit out if it was used every morning. The coffee percolator had its place. But a blender used once a week went in a cabinet. A decorative bowl filled with random batteries and rubber bands and expired coupons would not have appeared, because the counter was understood to have a purpose, and that purpose was not holding things that had nowhere else to go. That one rule, The counter is a work surface, not a landing strip. Changed the entire feel of the kitchen before a single zone was organized or a single drawer was sorted. When the counter is clear by default, the kitchen looks calm, even when it is not perfectly tidy. When the counter is clear, you can actually use it. You do not have to push things aside to roll out dough or set down a hot pan. The surface is available because it was kept available every single day on purpose, and clearing the counter was only the beginning. The real system lived in how the rest of the kitchen was divided, not by instinct, not by habit, but by zones. Each zone had a job, and every item in the kitchen was stored based on which zone it belonged to, and how often it was actually used. That logic is what kept the kitchen from drifting. And it starts with understanding what the three zones were and why they were drawn where they were. The 1950s kitchen was not organized by category in the way most people think about organization today. It was not simply pots here, pans there, spices alphabetized on a rack. The logic ran deeper than that. The kitchen was divided into zones based on what happened in each part of the room, and every single item was stored as close as possible to the zone where it was actually used. The system was built around the work, not around the cabinet space that happened to be available. There were 3 zones, and they were simple enough that anyone could learn them in a single afternoon. The prep zone was where food was handled before it went anywhere near heat, the counter space where vegetables were chopped. Dough was rolled, ingredients were measured and assembled. The cooking zone was the area directly around the stove, where heat, timing, and constant attention were all required at the same time. The cleaning zone was the sink and the space surrounding it, where dishes were washed, food scraps were dealt with, and the kitchen was returned to order after the meal. 3 zones, 3 different kinds of work. And the storage in each zone answered one question only: what do you need within arm's reach when you are standing here doing this job? In the prep zone, that meant cutting boards were stored vertically in a slot or flat on a low shelf directly beneath the main work counter. Mixing bowls were nested and kept in a low cabinet near that same surface. Measuring cups and spoons hung on a small hook or sat in a dedicated drawer close enough to reach without taking a single step away from the work. The peeler, the grater, the paring knife, all of it was within immediate reach of the place where it would be used. There was no walking across the kitchen for a spatula. There was no opening 3 drawers to find the right size measuring cup. Everything that belonged to prep lived in the prep zone, and it stayed there. The cooking zone followed the same logic applied to a different set of demands. Pots and pans were stored in the cabinet directly below or beside the stove, not across the kitchen in a separate pantry cabinet. Pot holders hung on a hook or sat folded on a small shelf within 1 step of the burners, because when something is boiling over, you do not have seconds to spare searching a drawer. The wooden spoon, the ladle, the slotted spoon, these often stood in a simple crock or jar right next to the stove, visible and immediately available. Cooking oils and the most used seasonings were kept near the stove as well, because reaching for salt in the middle of cooking should never require crossing the room. What this created was not just efficiency, it created a kind of physical calm while cooking. When everything needed is already exactly where the work is happening, the act of cooking becomes quieter. There is no interruption, no pivot, no small frustration of realizing something is not where it should be. The body moves through the task without extra steps. And the mind can stay on the food instead of on the search for equipment. The cleaning zone was organized with the same discipline. Dish soap lived at the sink, not under it in a jumble of supplies. The drying rack, if one was used, had its permanent spot beside the sink and did not migrate. Dish towels were folded and kept in the drawer closest to the sink, not in a random drawer across the kitchen, not draped over the oven handle as a default because there was no other place for them. The cleaning zone contained what was needed for cleaning, and it was arranged so that cleaning could happen without searching or reorganizing first. Now inside each of those zones, there was a second layer of organization that modern kitchens almost never apply. Items were stored based on how often they were actually used. Daily items lived at the easiest level, eye height or just below, front of the shelf, top of the drawer. Things used several times a week lived at a reachable level but perhaps a step back or 1 shelf lower. Items used occasionally, the large roasting pan for Sunday dinners, The special occasion dishes, the extra canning equipment, lived on the highest shelves at the very back of deep cabinets or on a separate shelf in the pantry. Out of the way, but with a fixed home so they were never truly lost. This sounds straightforward, and it is, but it requires something that most modern kitchens have never actually done. A deliberate decision about every item in the kitchen. Not a vague sense of where things go, but a real, specific, named place for each object. The vegetable peeler does not live in the utensil drawer. It lives in the front left section of the utensil drawer, in the prep zone, within reach of the cutting board. That level of specificity is what separates a kitchen that runs from one that drifts. Do you know where everything in your kitchen actually lives right now? Not approximately, but exactly. Most people have a rough idea, a zone, maybe a drawer, but rough ideas are where the searching begins. The 1950s woman knew exactly, and she knew because she had made the decision once, placed the item, and then returned it to that place every single time. The system did not require daily effort to maintain because the decision had already been made. The only thing required after that was the habit of returning things to where they belonged. Nothing was set down temporarily, nothing was left on the counter to deal with later. Everything went back to its home the moment it was done being used. That countertop rule, clear by default, applied not just to appliances but to everything that could otherwise accumulate. Papers did not live on the kitchen counter. Medications did not live on the kitchen counter. Children's schoolwork, car keys, loose change, and the stack of catalogs that arrived in the mail did not live on the kitchen counter. Those things had homes elsewhere in the house. The kitchen counter belonged to the kitchen, and it was protected from becoming a catch-all surface. With the same consistency that the zones were protected from becoming disorganized. The result was a counter that was genuinely usable every time someone walked into the kitchen, ready before the work began. Clear before the first ingredient came out. That readiness changed how cooking felt, not as a chore to be wrestled into order first, but as a task the kitchen was already prepared for. The zone system handled the surfaces and the drawers, but the kitchen extended beyond the prep counter and the stove. Behind those cabinet doors and down the hall in the pantry, there was a second layer of organization that kept the whole system stocked, controlled, and free from the slow creep of excess that fills modern kitchens until the shelves no longer close properly. The pantry in a 1950s home was not an overflow room. It was not the place where things went when there was no obvious spot for them in the main kitchen. It was an extension of the same system, organized, intentional, and maintained with the same discipline as the counter and the drawers. Walking into a well-kept 1950s pantry felt like opening a kitchen that knew exactly what it had and exactly where everything was. Nothing was buried. Nothing had expired unnoticed behind a newer can. Nothing was doubled up because someone forgot a jar of something was already on the shelf and bought another one at the store. The organization followed the same frequency logic that governed the kitchen zones. What was used most often sat at eye level, front of the shelf, easy to grab without moving anything. Flour, sugar, oats, canned goods used weekly. These were at the center of the pantry, visible and immediately reachable. Items used less frequently sat further back or on a higher shelf. And everything, every can, every container, every box, was stored facing forward with its label visible. Not because it looked neat, though it did, but because you should never have to pick something up to find out what it is. A pantry where you can read every label without touching a single thing is a pantry where nothing gets forgotten. Dry goods were often transferred out of their paper packaging and into containers. Glass jars, ceramic canisters, or simple lidded tins. This was not a decorating choice. Paper packaging split and attracted pests, and made it nearly impossible to see how much of something remained at a glance. A glass jar of rice showed you immediately that you were running low. A sealed canister of flour stayed fresh longer and stacked cleanly without toppling. The containers were labeled in simple handwriting, not elaborate, not decorative, just clear. Flour, sugar, cornmeal, rice. The label told you what was inside without guessing, and the jar showed you how much was left without digging. This meant that writing a grocery list was never a project. You looked at the pantry, you saw what was low, and you wrote it down. There was no pulling things out to check dates, no discovering that what you thought you had was actually empty, no doubling up on something because the old one was hidden behind 3 other things. The entire pantry was perfectly legible and organized. You could read it in 30 seconds and know exactly what the kitchen needed. The cleaning supplies followed the same contained logic. They did not spread across multiple cabinets or migrate around the kitchen based on whoever used them last. Cleaning supplies had one home, often a specific cabinet beneath the sink or a dedicated shelf in the pantry, with a clear boundary between food storage and cleaning products. Within that space, the organization was just as deliberate. The dish soap lived in one spot. The scrubbing brush had a place. The extra bar of hand soap and the spare sponges were stored together so that replacing a depleted item meant going to one known location, not hunting through 3 different cabinets hoping to find a backup. Dish towels and pot holders had their own fixed places too. Dish towels were folded, not bundled, not stuffed, and kept in the drawer nearest the sink, as discussed. But the supply of extra dish towels was stored in one place only, usually a linen shelf or a specific drawer in the pantry. When a towel wore out, a new one came from that place. When the supply ran low, it went on the list. There was no mystery about how many the household had or where to find them. Now this is where the one-in one-out rule becomes impossible to separate from the rest of the system. The 1950s woman did not operate a kitchen that grew without limit. She did not accumulate. She did not buy a new spatula because the current one was slightly inconvenient. She did not hold on to a pot with a broken handle because getting rid of things felt wasteful. The kitchen contained what it needed, and when something new came in, something old went out. Not always immediately, not as a rigid ceremony, but as a natural rhythm that kept the cabinets from filling beyond their capacity. This rule applied most clearly to the pantry and the grocery cycle. She bought what was needed based on what was actually low. She did not buy 3 extra cans of tomatoes because they were on sale if there was already no room on the shelf for 3 extra cans of tomatoes. The pantry was stocked to a level, not bare, never chaotic, but maintained within a range. Enough to have what was needed. Not so much that the shelves became unmanageable or the back corners turned into a graveyard of forgotten ingredients. Think about the last time you cleaned out your own pantry. Did you find things that had expired years ago? Duplicates of items you forgot you already had? Ingredients bought for one recipe and never used again, pushed to the back and eventually invisible? That accumulation is not a character flaw. It is what happens when a kitchen has no system for controlling what comes in. The 1950s pantry did not have that problem because the shopping list was written from the pantry itself. Based on what was actually visible and actually low, the system fed itself. The same restrained thinking applied to kitchen tools and equipment. The kitchen held what was genuinely used. A good set of pots, not a tower of mismatched ones inherited from 3 different households. A few quality knives, kept sharp and stored in one place, rather than a drawer full of dull blades of varying sizes with no clear purpose. The question was never, where do I put this? The question was, does this kitchen actually need this? And if the honest answer was no, the item did not stay. Does your kitchen have things in it right now that you have not touched in a year? Things stored in cabinets not because they serve the kitchen, but because you have not decided what to do with them yet? The 1950s kitchen made that decision early and kept making it. The system stayed clean, not just because things were organized, but because the total number of things was kept at a level the system could actually hold. The pantry and the supplies were the storeroom behind the visible kitchen. They were the reserve that fed the zones. And when the reserve was orderly, the zones stayed orderly too. The whole kitchen held together because each part of it was maintained with the same quiet consistency. No corner was left to drift. No shelf was allowed to become a catch-all. The discipline that kept the counter clear was the same discipline that kept the pantry legible. But knowing where everything lives is only half of what made the 1950s kitchen work. The other half was a habit so simple it barely sounds like a system at all. It happened at the end of every use and was the reason it looked the same tomorrow. Without it, zones unravel. With it, the kitchen holds its shape almost without effort. The zones were designed. The pantry was stocked with discipline. The counters were kept clear by intention. But none of that would have held for long without one final habit that tied the entire system together. It was not a complicated process at all. It did not require a checklist or a schedule or a dedicated hour set aside on a particular day of the week. It happened after every single use of the kitchen, whether that use was a full Sunday dinner or a cup of tea made on a Tuesday afternoon. The kitchen was reset before anyone left the room. Reset is the right word for it because that is precisely what it was. Not a deep clean, not a reorganization. A reset, returning every item to its home, wiping every surface that had been used, putting away everything that had come out, and leaving the kitchen in the same condition it was in before the cooking began. The cutting board went back to its place in the prep zone. The pot went back under the stove. The dish towel was refolded or replaced with a clean one and returned to its drawer. The counter was wiped and left clear. The sink was clean. The kitchen was closed. That word, closed, matters. The 1950s kitchen had a concept built into its daily rhythm that most modern kitchens have completely lost. The kitchen was open when it was in use and closed when the work was done. Closed did not mean locked or off limits. It meant finished. The meal was over, the kitchen had been returned to order, and it was not going to be slowly dismantled again by dishes left in the sink, ingredients left on the counter, or pots sitting on the stove waiting to be dealt with later. Later, in a kitchen without a reset habit, has a way of becoming never. This is where the modern kitchen most often falls apart, not in the design of its zones or the logic of its storage. Most people have some version of an organizational system, even if it is imperfect. The collapse happens in the reset. Dinner ends, and the dishes go in the sink because everyone is full and tired and the kitchen can wait until morning. Except morning comes with breakfast, and now there are last night's dishes and this morning's dishes. And the counter has 2 meals worth of things on it, and the coffee is being made next to last night's cutting board. And the kitchen that felt manageable yesterday now feels like a problem that needs an entire afternoon to fix. Unfortunately, that specific afternoon rarely comes. And so the kitchen drifts further from its own system, one skipped reset at a time. The 1950s woman understood something practical about this that did not require philosophy or discipline in the dramatic sense. She understood that a kitchen reset after a meal takes roughly the same amount of time whether you do it immediately or the next morning. But done immediately, it costs almost nothing emotionally. The kitchen is already warm, the water is already running. The rhythm of cooking carries naturally into the rhythm of cleaning. Done the next morning, it costs something much heavier. You face yesterday's mess before the day has even begun, and the kitchen feels like a burden before breakfast is made. So the reset happened immediately, every time. Not because she was exceptionally disciplined, but because the habit was set so early and reinforced so consistently that it did not feel like discipline at all. It felt like the natural end of cooking. The way pulling on a coat feels like the natural end of getting dressed before going outside. The action completed the sequence, and leaving it undone felt wrong, in the same way going outside without a coat feels incomplete. This habit was passed down not through instruction alone but through presence. Children in those households grew up watching the kitchen be reset after every meal. They helped dry dishes before they were tall enough to reach the sink comfortably. They carried things back to their places because they knew those places, the same way they knew where their own shoes belonged by the door. The system was absorbed through daily repetition, not explained in a single conversation and then forgotten. It became part of how a kitchen was understood to work. Do you remember a kitchen like that? A grandmother's, maybe? Or an aunt's? A kitchen where everything seemed to know where it belonged, where the counter was always clear when you walked in, where you never had to move 3 things to find the one you needed. That feeling was not an accident of personality. It was the result of a reset practiced so many thousands of times that it had become invisible. The system ran in the background, maintained by a habit so ingrained it looked effortless from the outside. That invisibility is the highest achievement of any home system. When the effort behind the order disappears into routine, the order simply exists. The kitchen feels calm not because someone is constantly tending it, but because the tending happens in small, consistent moments that never allow the disorder to accumulate past a certain point. The reset after 1 meal is 5 minutes. The reset after 3 skipped meals is an hour of frustration. The 1950s kitchen never let the debt build. There is something else worth naming here, and it is this. The reset was not just about cleanliness. It was about what the kitchen communicated to everyone who walked into it. A cleared counter, a clean sink, a kitchen returned to its resting state. These things said that the room was ready. Ready for the next person who needed to use it. Ready for tomorrow morning. Ready to function without first requiring effort. The kitchen was maintained not just for the woman who kept it, but for the whole household. And everyone in the household understood what the system required of them in return. That is the part that modern kitchens have lost most completely. Not the organizational logic, which can be rebuilt in a weekend, but the shared understanding of how the room is supposed to be left. When everyone in a household knows where things live and returns them there, the system maintains itself across multiple people and multiple uses throughout the day. When only one person knows the system and everyone else treats the kitchen as a pass-through, the maintenance falls to one person alone, and that is too much weight for any habit to carry indefinitely. The 1950s kitchen worked because it was a shared agreement, even when it was not spoken aloud. The zones were understood, the homes of individual items were understood. The reset was understood, and that shared understanding is something that can be rebuilt in any kitchen, in any decade, in any size of home. It does not require a larger pantry or better cabinets or more drawer space. It requires a decision about where each thing lives, followed by the consistent habit of returning it there, followed by a reset at the end of every use that closes the kitchen until it is needed again. Start with the counter, clear it to its working surface and keep it that way for 1 week. Then assign one specific zone. Then make the reset a non-negotiable end to every cooking session, no matter how small. The whole system does not have to be rebuilt in a single afternoon. It was never built that way originally either. It was built habit by habit, decision by decision, reset by reset, until one day it simply ran. That is what the 1950s kitchen actually was. Not a perfect room in a perfect era, but a room that had been given a system and a daily practice to keep the system alive. The calm people remember in kitchens like that. The grandmother's kitchen that always felt ready, always felt settled, was not nostalgia for a different time. It was memory of a room that worked. And a room that works is not out of reach. It is just waiting for the same decisions to be made again. There is a great deal more here on the quiet systems that kept older homes running. Habits and methods that never made it into any guidebook because they were simply lived. Leave a comment and tell me which part of this kitchen system you want to try first. The counter rule, zones, pantry logic, or the reset. Find the one that makes the biggest difference today.